Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, the Bucks avoid elimination and force a Game 6 with an impressive victory, handling the Indiana Pacers. So the series now moves to Indy. Who's facing the pressure? Will we see Giannis and or Damian Lillard return? And I suppose what we should really key in is what worked for the Bucks and what can translate into Game 6. We'll get into that conversation coming up after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Frank Madden, as we're here to break down an impressive Bucks win in Game 5 over the Indiana Pacers. Today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. It's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Frank, where to begin with this one that everything seemed to work for the Bucks, especially in those final 3 quarters of the game. We could talk about the offense. We could talk about the defense that was especially keyed in, and some of the things Doc Rivers had to say after the game about some changes that they made. Or we could talk about the fact that as much as we've called for the young guys, this was maybe the vet game, that it was all of those guys that were the most impactful for the Bucks.
Yeah, I mean, I probably just start with, the weird psychology of this series. I mean, it's weird psychology for the teams, I think, with this inverted sort of pressure dynamic from the outset. The Pacers, becoming favorites from Game 1 because of the Giannis situation. Bucks obviously come out firing, win Game 1. But the Bucks as the 3 seed, we've talked all year, right? This is a team whose expectations were championship or bust, and yet we've now gotten ourselves into the situation where, so many people that chatting with, seeing on Twitter, things like that. It's just like such a weird dynamic, because it felt almost like fan appreciation night, like some like weird dynamic. Like it was like, we're gonna, hey, I don't know if the Bucks are gonna win tonight. This could be the last game of the season, but they're gonna go out fighting and consistent with what we've seen throughout this series. And so, I mean, can you just imagine if you had told us back in October that the Bucks would be staring at a first round 5-game loss, and we'd all be sitting around saying like, I'm really proud of the guys. And, it just tells you what a bizarre potential end we were staring at to, a bizarre season that has just had so many twists and turns. So yeah, I mean, we've said it again and again, right? Like, I know I didn't have any real expectations, positive or negative, coming into this series. Didn't really know what to expect. When you lose Dame on top of Giannis, obviously, like, what can you really expect from this group? I mean, we've talked about how, during the regular season, like, the starters were incredible, but like you take like one thing away and then like all things go to hell, right? Like the bench lineups were so difficult to manage, all this stuff. And here they are with, Khris Middleton and a cloud of dust, basically. And to come out the way that they did tonight, absorb some early body blows in terms of 3-point shooting, the continued hot 3-point shooting early on from the Pacers. I think they were 7 of 12 to start the game from 3.
Yep.
But, Bucks came out, they said, all right, we're going to switch a ton. Doc said, we're going to basically not overreact to the 2s and try to take away the 3s. I think the Pacers were like 1 for 6 on corner 3s tonight, which is a drastic change from what we've seen in prior games. And it felt like there was a level of aggression on offense tonight that we haven't necessarily seen. And that was something else that Doc talked about, which is basically telling guys, like, if you got a crease, like, attack it, don't just attack to pass. And we saw, various guys do that. Pat Bev, perhaps most notably in the second quarter, going on attack mode and giving a Bucks a huge shot in the arm when they made that big run to take the lead that they ultimately wouldn't relinquish. Pat Connaughton randomly had a drive from like practically half court with the paint wide open. And so, again, we'll talk a little about what of this is sustainable, if anything. That's obviously the big question for Thursday. But I think just you look up and down the box score, you got responses from the guys that you needed. I think that was probably the biggest takeaway for me. And we can spend a lot of time talking about individual guys. Khris Middleton, The Rock, the steady hand that has been one constant for this team all series. He was fantastic setting the tone early and just continue to do that throughout the game. 29 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists. I mean, like just average Khris Middleton game in this series. And then a huge bounce back for Bobby Portis and big game again, a huge game from Pat Bev, and also a huge, sign of life from Malik Beasley, who I felt good for after obviously a pretty trying series from him, especially given, the last couple months have not gone the way that he wanted, loses his starting job, gets it back because of the injuries, but obviously a lot of focus on him largely because of some of what he's said about the Pacers and not so much for what he's been doing on the floor. So, just a lot of positives up and down the lineup, obviously, especially from those veterans. And, you live to fight another day, which at this point, that's pretty much all the Bucks can do is just try to survive to the next game.
There's a lot of interesting things that came out of post game from Doc Rivers. I don't know how much of it you heard. I'm sure you've seen a few of the quotes as Eric has tweeted a few of them out. The big one we'll get to in a moment. But some of the things that you touched on, some of the aggressiveness offensively, Doc basically said afterwards it was mandatory that it was, I suppose we start here. It was very interesting before the game because the Bucks had a walkthrough and a shoot around earlier this morning. They've done this more frequently where they will basically do their shoot around in the afternoon at the arena and the arena gets shut down. It's not common in the league, but the Bucks have made it common the last couple of months. They did it again today, but when they typically do that, it's when they're returning from a road trip where they played a night game a couple of days ago and Doc doesn't want to go through a shoot around in the morning with the guys and he wants to give them rest. So we'll just do it in the afternoon at the arena. That wasn't the case here. And their walkthrough was twice as long as it usually was, which prompted a lot of conspiracy theorists because when that happens, none of us are allowed in the bowl. None of the opposing team members, nobody in the media, nobody other than coaching staff, players, and media relations are allowed anywhere near that portion of the arena, which prompted a lot of, I wonder if this is working out Giannis and Giannis is going to play, which it very well may have been. But Doc talked about some of the things that they went through in that, not in great detail. Some of the things they went through in the morning, aggressiveness on offense was one of them. It said, look, we looked at the film. Our pick setting was one of the big things that we looked at. We looked at Malik Beasley and Pat Connaughton specifically and said, whoever is coming off of those screens, they need to try to attack and score because all of our guys are making a point to pass coming off of screens. And you're letting the Pacers get away with some of their defense. So we need to get going downhill, get into the paint. Pat Beverly has done that all throughout the series and all throughout his career. You mentioned Pat Connaughton did it a couple of times. I think we even noticed at times they were attacking Tyrese Halliburton, not to great extent, not to great lengths, but you started to see glimpses of it. And defensively too, when Doc mentioned, they took 40-some threes the other night. It's just way too many. We decided we're going to switch everything. Even with Brook Lopez, we didn't care. If Pascal Siakam hit the twos, fine, but we're not giving you those threes. And there were a couple of moments where I think we started to get reactionary and kind of cave in a little bit. So that's when he called the timeouts and said, no, don't worry if that happens. We're not giving up threes. And I think that was one of the noticeable changes. There were a couple of stretches too where you looked out there and you said, man, I mean, here we are. Danilo Gallinari getting postseason minutes for this team, but it was actually helpful for the group where you saw, man, Brook Lopez hasn't been on the floor for a while. Part of that was obviously the intention of we just got to switch everything on the perimeter.
Yeah, and when Brook comes back in to start the third quarter, he's guarding Aaron Nesmith, kind of shading off him in the corner. And you saw Khris guarding Pascal Siakam to start possessions, and obviously
Miles Turner.
Yeah, and they were doing switching. That's right. Yeah, on Turner. Sorry. And they were doing switching and basically saying like, all right, if you want to get Brook involved in an action, then you're gonna have to do stuff with Aaron Nesmith, who they typically do not do stuff with. And the interesting thing was, kind of the interesting piece there too was, the Bucks go on that 7-0. I mean, they're only up 5, I think, at halftime.
Yeah.
So as big as the second quarter was, it was, they needed the second quarter to basically reverse the fact that they had an 8-point deficit coming out of the first quarter when the Pacers hit all those threes. So, Khris comes out, hits a 3 to start the third quarter. And I forget how they got the other buckets, but basically they kind of immediately jump out to this double-digit lead, and then that was kind of it. But defensively, it felt like it took the Pacers a few minutes to really kind of collect themselves and figure out like how they wanted to attack. And I thought it was interesting. They didn't really try to put Brook in actions with Nesmith. They really tried to attack through the middle, which they had some success doing. And it felt like Brook was having a hard time rotating over in time to really bother them a lot when they did that. Because Brook was, Nesmith's like 40% plus 3-point shooter, right? Like, they've feasted off corner threes all game, so he had to be at least a little mindful there. But, overall, they didn't shoot a ton of threes, and they shot 32%, which I think is like the first game this series, I think, where they've been just sort of like average. Like it's been kind of like really good or really bad for them. I think they were 26% in game 3, which is partly why I think you really wanted to win that game, and they were obviously horrible in game 1. But yeah, it was an interesting kind of chess match between Carlisle and Doc Rivers. And overall, I think, limiting the threes, and then also just, the tempo, this has been the theme all season when the Bucks have played the Pacers, but just trying to make sure that you're not letting them go out on, an extended run. And obviously a huge part of that is scoring consistently enough that the Pacers are having to take the ball out of the net and inbound it rather than being able to run off of, live rebounds or worse yet, turnovers. And, Justin, I thought I was seeing things in the fourth quarter. Bobby Portis is deflecting passes and going in for dunks, and Malik Beasley's getting steals, and of course
deflecting a pass and catching it.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, what's going on here, right? Like the Bucks actually getting out in transition at a few different points. It was like, oh my God. And I think that run in the second quarter where Pat Bev, I think, found Bobby for a layup in transition as well. And obviously, the double whammy is not only is the Bucks scoring, they're taking the Pacers out of their fast offense, but the crowd is feeding off it as well. And there were definitely some visible empty seats at tip-off, which for an 8:30 game, not a good sign. It's not like this was, the 5:30 start that we're going to see on Thursday in Indiana. But the crowd that was there, I mean, you were in the arena, you can talk to it. The crowd that was there was ready to support this team. And it was pretty cool to even just sitting at home, watching it on TV. It was pretty cool. You could feel the atmosphere, even on television. And, it felt like, again, like that group of fans said, you know what? We know we don't got Dame. We don't have Giannis. Who knows what our expectations should be, but we're going to go down, cheering like hell for this team. And you could tell the team fed off that as well.
Yeah. If this is it, this is it. But we're bringing, it was, and that was the interesting part. And we can spend some time on this coming up after the break, but you wondered what you were going to be in store for, given the 3-1 deficit and the fact that we knew well in advance, Giannis, and we didn't know until about an hour and a half before tip, but you knew, as you started to see on social media, Giannis and Damian Lillard were not playing. So you wondered, what's this going to mean for fans in the arena? And also the unsettling familiarity of, why does this feel very familiar? Oh, that's right. Because the Bucks were down 3-1 at home last year in an 8:30 tip in game 5 against the Miami Heat. So there was that component to it as well. But we'll talk a little bit about what the experience was in the arena and some more on Malik Beasley, because we mentioned him and his performance. The Bucks are going to need somebody other than Bobby Portis and Khris Middleton to consistently give them some scoring and moments going forward, especially if you don't have Giannis and or Damian Lillard. Is it Malik Beasley based on what we've seen in these last 2 games? Frank and I will get into that conversation coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you about DoorDash with Mother's Day coming up here. It's a busy time for all of us to get everything that you need for mom. Make sure she feels special on her special day. No better place to find all those things than on DoorDash. 50% off. You get that off your next order up to $15 when you spend 15 or more on your next flour, convenience, grocery or retail order now on DoorDash. So you can find all the things you need for mom and save money while doing so as well. Something mom would certainly appreciate. It's the best way to make mom smile here on Mother's Day, whether it's flowers, gifts from the brand she loves, and most importantly, delivered the very same day through DoorDash. Moms are a gift, so give her the best gift of all this Mother's Day. The gift is thoughtful as she is with DoorDash. You can find that gift from hundreds of expertly crafted boutiques to the best of tech to self-care essentials and more, all delivered right to her door. Get all those gifts all in one place and get 50% off your next order up to $15 when you spend 15 or more on your next flour, convenience, grocery, or retail order now with the code LOCKEDONNBA. That is Locked On NBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply. And it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you the shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet, $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So we touched on that atmosphere, Frank. It was interesting because of the obvious and the elephant in the room of, are we witnessing another first round exit for the Bucks and another one in 5 games? This one would have been easier to stomach with those absences. But there was an anxiousness in the crowd, and especially through the first quarter where it was a back and forth game. But once the Bucks started to pull ahead, there were some empty seats, but I will say the group that was in there was loud and was very energetic. They had a lot of reasons to be so in the final 3 quarters, but it's something I know we've heard players talk about as well, especially Bobby Portis. I think that was the big one a lot of us circled. We've gone over the splits of Bobby home versus road numbers, and especially given the way his night ended prematurely in Game 4, you were extra curious to see, okay, what is Bobby Portis going to do in this one tonight? Because, again, the Bucks are going to need Bobby Portis, maybe not 29 points, but to be a double-double guy and a 20-point per game scorer with no Giannis.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I feel like there's definitely a vocal subset of Bucks fans, I think, that are very skeptical of Bobby's value, especially in the playoffs, given his recent history, whether it was the Boston series a couple years ago, the Heat series last year, and the first part of this series, right? Yeah. Famously that Nets series in the championship run, he barely plays, but then comes back and has obviously a couple of really big performances, including in the fourth quarter of Game 6 of the NBA Finals. He had a couple of huge shots, and who can forget his technical foul followed by high stepping down the sideline with Scott Foster in the building, who was also in the building tonight. Yes, but I don't know. I mean, for me, it's always been complicated with Bobby because I think there's an intangible effect with him. Like you see it, especially at home, the way that he's able to get the crowd going. I think he means something to this locker room, the way that he, gets along with the important guys like the stars, I think is not nothing, right? I think that stuff is important. I don't know what, if you lose Bobby Portis at some point, like what that would mean. And especially in the regular season, because his regular season durability and night-to-night productivity, and especially his ability to step in for Giannis when he's out, has meant that, you can at times absorb Giannis' absence in ways that you might not otherwise expect. Of course, in this series, they have generally not been able to absorb the absence of Giannis, which of course is not surprising given this is the playoffs, and again, like Bobby getting himself kicked out of the last game when he just seemed like he was getting off to a good start, and you just needed him so badly with Dame no longer in the picture, was one of those things that you just hope like doesn't become like part of the, epitaph of the season, right? That Bobby Portis again shrunk from the spotlight in the playoffs. And so for him to come back with this game facing elimination, 14 of 24, 29 points, bringing, with Pat Bev, the swagger back to this team, reciprocating with the crowd. It was just really fun to see. And, again, like, I don't think, no matter what you think of Bobby, I don't think any of us would want to see him go out of this season the way that, it was trending. Right. So for him to respond was obviously awesome. And I mean, the problem is like, like normally in these sorts of series, you just like, well, get like one or two awesome Bobby Portis games. And then that, you don't need more than that. Right.
Yeah.
Well, unless Giannis is close to full health and Dame's coming back, you're going to need more than just like one good Bobby Portis game. You're probably going to need at least one more on Thursday to get you to even have a chance at a game 7. So, again, so it's not like he's redeemed everything about this series or anything like that, but it was important, I think, for him to respond. And I think when you just look at how the series has been trending, Siakam was incredible in those first couple games. They made a change to put Bobby more on him starting in game 3, and not that like Bobby has single-handedly shut down Pascal Siakam or something, because as we said, there's been lots of switching and everything. But you look at Siakam's numbers the past 3 games: 17 points, 13 points, tonight 12 points. So they have more degrees of freedom because they're at almost full health. Again, no Ben Mathurin, but other than that, right? Like, Halliburton, he may be slowed right now by the back injury. He had a weird game, I would say. And he's obviously hasn't been his, kind of prime self really for the
wasn't
past
the guy
months.
We saw in the regular season.
Yeah. But, again, he can still be a hugely impactful player, as we saw last game, just in the way that he's able to control the tempo and make plays for others. So, and obviously Miles Turner has been a monster. So for, Turner to be held in check tonight was probably the other big storyline. So again, it's like, we can kind of do these like debits and credits and figure out like, all right, well, Bucks can afford to allow one of those guys to do well, but then you need, whatever. Bottom line, Bucks need more guys playing above and beyond their typical production than the Pacers do. But certainly, hey, if Halliburton and Pascal and Miles want to bring some of the kind of negative energy that they are showing tonight to Indiana on Thursday, like that would, I think, be just fine with the Bucks.
That would, and look, energy, I think, is a big part of it. You can say some of it is coach speak, and some of it probably is. But after game 4, we heard Doc Rivers talk about how proud he was of the team and how much he liked coaching them, because they expected to win that game, and they were disappointed that they didn't win that game. After tonight, too, said, we had a pretty lively film session, which you don't typically expect for a team that's in a 3-games-to-1 hole, but everybody was engaged. Everybody was really into it. We went through a lot of stuff in film session, and you could just feel the energy when we went through film and went through our walkthrough. I don't know. I didn't know that we were going to win tonight. You never know that as a coach. You can say, hey, I knew we were going to win, but nobody ever knows. But I knew we were going to come out and play hard and play to win. I just liked the mental space we were in after film session. Again, we've heard a lot of that. And there are clear flaws with this Indiana Pacers team. It's why we kind of said, look, it's not the Miami Heat from a year ago. Obviously, losing Damian Lillard hurt that quite a bit. And that game on Friday night, it hurt even more so. And I mentioned, too, a couple of places. If the Bucks do lose this series, that game is probably the death knell, because that was right there for you. It's a much different ask to say, can you go get 2 games with your back against the wall? Maybe you get a shooting variance game. Maybe you get a game like this. That's an easier lift than to say, okay, now you got no margin for error and you got to win 3 games. But we've seen that approach from this team. I think that's the big part for Doc Rivers is some of those things that this team believes. When you hear Patrick Beverley and Bobby Portis talk about it and Doc, and talking about some of the things that they've changed too, you know, as much as we can bag on Doc Rivers for some things like this, I think you and I talked about this too. Wouldn't it be fitting, number one, for Doc Rivers to win a series where his team trails 3-1? Look, part of this is you just got to do something different because of the cards that you've been dealt. But I do think Doc has made some pretty good adjustments throughout this series so far. And one of the bigger ones, we talked about them switching everything defensively. Another piece of it, he talked about how much that helped them in transition in this game, especially as the game went on. And we saw that really tail off for the Pacers, especially in the second half. And Doc's point was, when we're switching everything, you just got to go find somebody when it's transition. So it's not worrying about where's my guy and trying to match up. You just know you got to get down the floor, find the closest body, and get to him. And he thought that helped them big time in the second half.
Yeah, and I'm thinking back to game 4. I think there were maybe in the third quarter, there were like 3 possessions out of like 5 or 6, it felt like, where Tyrese Halliburton got wide open threes. And I think 2 of them were like he was dribbling the ball up the floor and basically like nobody stopped the ball and he just like walked into wide open threes. And it's like, job one, guys, like stop the goddamn ball. Like, it's one thing if, they're throwing touchdown passes over the top of you or something like that. Like, that's bad enough, but to not pick up Tyrese freaking Halliburton, in transition, that's inexcusable. And so, yeah, I mean, it just felt like they've been tighter the last couple games. And, again, it's a cliche, but it is a combination. It's not that they've been like, the 86 Bears of basketball or something, or, like they've been perfectly on a string. Like, I think you still see it. There's times of kind of hesitation and things like that, especially when they're doing switch everything, even with Brooke, which they typically do not do, right? Like, they typically are not switching Brooke. They've switched other guys tons, but that is obviously a change for them. So, again, like this next game, obviously a lot of it's just going to come down to execution and, making plays. And I think if you're the Bucks in particular, like, and obviously again, depends on who's available, but the thing I was really worried about, basically, especially since Dame went out, like, how do you avoid the 6 minutes since you hit a field goal stretch, the 14-point quarter stretch, which we even saw in game 1. I think the third quarter they had that kind of, but they had a large margin for error. And so that's really the hard part, because if you have a 14-point quarter on Thursday, it's over. Yeah. Like, I don't think you're coming back from a 14-point third quarter. So, just valuing possessions and finding that balance of try to get the ball into the offense, over midcourt and into a play.
Yeah, maybe not flirt with an 8-second violation on every single
possession. Damn time. Yeah, exactly. So it'll be interesting to see. But you alluded to earlier, I'm so interested in the rotations for Thursday, because the fact that Doc went with, extended run of Gallo, Bees, Connaughton in particular. I mean, Pat's been pretty steady run throughout, right? Like, Gallo, obviously it's come and gone. Bees has kind of come and gone, but leaning into those guys, and very limited Ajax and AJ Green, which was interesting.
10 minutes total. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought was notable. And I think, 100% sets up, Bucks Twitter is going to be just beside itself on Thursday night. If like, that's, if Gallo's doing his weekend at Bernie's thing and, things aren't going their way. So I don't know. It was a weird night, Gallo being a net, what was he, plus 15. Kudos to him. He was kind of flailing around out there, scrapping, yelling, fighting, got to the line a couple times, I think, made one or two shots, and, just sort of battled enough to survive. But, let me just say this. If Gallo's playing 20 minutes again on Thursday, I'm I'm not bringing a whole lot of optimism because that probably means Giannis is definitely out too.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It'll be interesting to kind of see. I'm kind of okay with B's. I think I like AJ a lot. I think he's solid defensively. But this was a huge, a huge second half in particular from Bees. I feel like usually with Beasley, it's like you kind of know in the first half if he's going to have himself a game, but didn't seem like he got that many shots. But I thought it was interesting. I feel like especially in the second half, they were running him off screens and getting him on the move, getting him the ball. So it wasn't like he was just sitting in the corner waiting for Giannis or Dame to soak up a bunch of attention and kick it out to him. He was actually having to move and get open for his shots, which again, the Pacers allow the fewest wide open threes of any team in the league. They take that away. And so again, it puts the impetus on the offense and those types of shooters to actually have to move around and try to put themselves in a position to shoot. But I would also agree with what you said earlier. I mean, we saw Beasley attacking Halliburton and other guards when they put him on there. He had one in the fourth quarter where he got the layup and gave him a nice little flex.
I was surprised he didn't get teed up there.
And we've seen other guys do that as well. And so we've seen a little bit of that, like even early in the series where, Pat Bev usually will just be like, screw it, I'm just going to go at, Nembhard or Halliburton, try to draw a foul, if nothing else. But, the double-edged sword there is, when you miss layups, those are the shots that teams run out on. So you could see the similar strategy working not so well if the Bucks, don't finish like they did tonight. So again, we'll see. I don't think the Bucks have unlocked some killer strategy that is destined to work on Thursday. I think this is like so many series, especially when you have a talent deficit the way the Bucks do. The key is like being one step ahead of the opponent. So I think if you just come out and try to do the exact same thing, Rick Carlisle is probably going to find ways to attack and exploit it. So I think the question is like, even if they start that way, what's the counter that you got to have ready for them so that you can immediately go to a different look? Maybe it's, Ajax at the top of the zone again, right? Which we really didn't see tonight. But again, it's just setting up a really interesting chess match with, Rick Carlisle, who I think it's been 2011 since he's won a playoff series. So, it's been a minute for Rick since winning that championship in Dallas.
You mentioned the elephant in the room and what heavy minutes for Danilo Gallinari would actually mean in terms of who's on the court. So Doc Rivers did talk a little bit about that. I'm not sure what we actually learned from it, but it was an interesting quote nonetheless from Doc Rivers. So we'll take a look at that. The prospects of Giannis or Damian Lillard returning in this series as we now shift to Game 6 in Indianapolis. We will examine that after this on Locked On Bucks. Well, it's time to talk to you about Monopoly Go, and that is the newest craze that is out there. You can team up with your friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. There's so much to get. You get unique stickers. You can trade with your friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. There's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multiplayers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Monopoly Go, game on. So Thursday afternoon, Frank, you mentioned the time. This has been the series. So here's two quick observations. A series full of weird tip times that we have another 8:30 Central Time tip tonight. We had a 4:30 tip Central Time last week. We now have a 5:30 tip for Game 6. And the other thing is, can one of these two teams just wear a different jersey? Are we really going to play every single series with both teams wearing the same jerseys in each game? But we move to game 6 now. So obviously everybody is wondering, what does this mean for Giannis? We've heard all along from Doc Rivers, yeah, we like how he's progressing. He's doing this. He's close. The longer it's gone on, you get the sense this is just being coy and gamesmanship of, yep, Giannis could return. I don't know what to expect. You wondered if he was going to return today for all those reasons we talked about earlier, and the fact that it lines up that it's been 3 weeks since the injury. This has now been longer than you would anticipate for a lower level strain, which leads you to believe this is either very serious or there was some type of setback. But when Doc Rivers was asked about the chance of seeing either Giannis or Dame or both of them, he said, I don't know how to answer that, and paused for a while and just added, they're both very, very, very close. I don't think we're going to see Damian Lillard in this series. I think it's going to be quite some time. Even if the Bucks win 3 straight games and beat the Pacers, I don't know if you're going to see Damian Lillard again in the playoffs. The Giannis piece to me was always I don't know, can you get him back? I don't know that I expect him to play. It just feels like this is a very, very serious injury, and I would lean towards no, he doesn't play. I take that as the way that Doc has answered those questions of just, I'm not going to slam the door and say, well, there's this. And the fact that there hasn't been a whole lot of reporting of what he's doing. The reporting that has come out has made it sound like it's not very good. And some of those details that Shams has talked about leads you to believe, yeah, this isn't, extending this to game 7 means he can play. This is, you're going to need to go deep into the second round to see him, is the impression that I get.
So you wouldn't have heard it because you were actually at the game. Or maybe you heard people talking about it, but Stephanie Reddy in the 4th quarter, which was a little bit interesting that this was only delivered in the 4th quarter, but I forget the exact language she used, but she basically said that made it seem like there was a reasonable chance that Damian Lillard could play on Thursday. I don't recall what she said about Giannis, but she made it seem like Dame was closer because of his whatever shooting he got off today, that he felt much better. Take that for what it's worth.
So he did.
I'll wait for Chris Haynes. I'll wait for Chris Haynes to tell us, since that'll be coming directly from Games Camp. But Stephanie Reddy at least teased the idea that Dame could be coming back.
So he did not work out or shoot, but when the Bucks go through warmups, I remember looking down there and thinking, wait a minute, is that Damian Lillard? And he was shooting before the game, even when fans would start to be trickling into the arena, which kind of surprised me. It's not like insider intel or anything. It's not like I'm attempting to be shams. Everything that I've heard leads you to believe, no, it's a while with Damian Lillard, which surprises me if that's the report or insinuation from Stephanie Reddy.
I mean, he was in a walking boot like 3 days ago, right? So that would seem to,
and crutches, support
the notion of skepticism. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would hate it if they came back.
Well, and I
then
think
lose.
this is what you're getting at.
Like it's obviously the worst. I mean, it's a bad scenario for them to be hurt with, kind of like medium term type injuries that don't endanger their next season but keep them out of the playoffs, and you lose in the first round. I mean, obviously that sucks, right? That's like a really unfortunate outcome for this season. It could be worse though, right? The worst outcome is they sustain some sort of injury that impacts their readiness for camp,
an 8 to 12 month recovery, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Like obviously that's like the do not pass go like type of scenario that we're talking about. So I don't know. I mean, like it's felt like there's been, conservativeness certainly in the way that they've handled the Giannis situation. So again, but Giannis, right? I mean, now that they've gotten to an elimination game, but now that they've fended off one of those and it's do or die and he's been doing work, Giannis is going to want to play, so it's going to have to come down to the medical team making, I think, a sober assessment of the risks and what he should or should not be doing. So I don't know. I mean, again, like it's not like he's gotten to the point of, it wasn't like he was getting out his normal shot routine pregame and doing everything that, everything but playing in a game, right?
For all we know, he was doing that 2 hours before the game when the Arena Bowl was closed for 2 hours, though.
There you go. So I think the bottom line is we're not going to know. The injury reports are due 5 p.m. local time the day before a game.
Yep.
So that would be, I guess, 4 Central Time, right? Because Indiana's Eastern Time. So 4 o'clock Central Time on Wednesday, I guess, is when, in theory, like they will have to submit, and then 4:30, I guess, would be potentially the first injury report that we may see. The designation. And so, like, if they're questionable,
I would guess they're both doubtful.
Yeah, if they're questionable, to me, questionable implies like
they're playing.
There's a good chance that there's a good chance that they might play. If they're both doubtful, I agree. To me, doubtful is like, and that's what they've been these last couple of games. Which I don't know what that means, right? Like, should we read into like, there's progress there, but they've still been getting ruled out. It's not like they've gotten even to the point of being a game time decision. So I don't know what to expect. I will continue to expect nothing and hope for, the scrappy, plucky 2024 Bucks to provide us another surprise, which, again, I don't know about you, Justin. I mean, we've been following this team essentially all of our lives for 30 plus years at this point. That feels very throwbackish, the way that I've been kind of processing this team. It feels very much like mid 2000s Bucks, where it's like, oh man, if we could take them to a game 7, that'd be cool, right? Like,
if only we could take those Rodney Rogers and Jason Kidd Nets to a game 7.
I'm not even gonna think about winning a first round series. That's too ambitious, right? Like, let's just try to get to a 3rd win in a first round series, right? So it definitely feels like a complete reset, a very quick reset of expectations for the Bucks that we've had to, go through here with these injuries. But I don't know. It's fun. There is something kind of fun about that. The lack of kind of expectation and pressure.
Playing with house money.
It is. But then the irony is like, well, if one or both those guys come back, then it's like, well, now like, So this is sports, right? I mean, I don't know. It's been fun in its own weird way, in a way that I would not want to experience again. So yeah, I don't know. Shout out to Khris Middleton. Thank you, Khris. Thanks, Khris Middleton, man. Like the validation of my Khris Middleton loyalty has been fun. I know I'm in good company with you and Camille on this one, but that, regardless of outcome, I think Khris reminding us that he can still play at this, essentially an all-star level when it really matters, has been really enjoyable to watch. I mean, he's at 27, 9, and 5 in the playoffs right now, which is like, what more do you want from this guy? And I think his defense has been really solid too, right? For all the questions that we had, I think deservedly early in the season about can he hold up defensively. I mean, what more do you want from Khris Middleton? If nothing else, even if they don't come out of this series, I think we'll remember this as, the Khris Middleton reminding us to respect Khris Middleton.
I'm still here. Right. Our statistician passed Dave Keane a note early in the game about Chris's shooting 95% on, and I just looked at the number and assumed like field goals in this series, the way that he's been shooting against the Pacers, but it was free throws. But yeah, he's been, and look, if the Bucks take this thing to game 7, Khris Middleton is undoubtedly going to be a big reason why. Schedule the ceremony for halftime, that his jersey gets retired at halftime of game 7 in this first round series, if that's the case. 2 things, but as we wrap up here, I guess number one, not to sound cliche here, but I just wanted to see this team fight and go out fighting like we did in that Celtics series. When you were clearly undermanned, it should not have gone 7 games. And granted, it was Giannis that was doing a lot of the heavy lifting there. But this team, they didn't get to properly defend their title because of that Khris Middleton injury. They went down swinging. And you wanted to see the same here. You didn't see that last year. Obviously, there was a lot that went into it on and off the floor for reasons that the team came up short. You didn't see it. So you just wanted to see the fight you saw in game 4 against Indiana and the result that you saw tonight. So in that front, you're happy to see what you saw here. I did actually, as we're talking, get a text from someone who's not just a fan and has some connection to the team that said, I get the feeling Giannis is going to play on Thursday night, and I'm assuming that's the reason why things were closed down. So
that's why you got to stay till the end of every episode of Locked On Bucks. You never know who's going to text Justin at 1:30 in the morning. God damn it! I got to.
I mean, look, and I think that's the other thing is if he does play at any point in this series, there's just going to be a lot of anxiety because of the dread and fear of, man, I hope he doesn't do something here.
Yeah, I mean, but look, I mean, Achilles is really the thing that you would worry about, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, and it was interesting listening to Jeff Stotts on the low post a couple weeks ago, because it was interesting because I mean the KD injury in the 2019 finals was brought up, right, where he has a calf injury, comes back, and then tears his Achilles. And it was interesting because Jeff made the point that like he doesn't actually think that that is like a typical, you know, risk factor, like a very elevated risk factor that, you know, he would be really endangering the Achilles much coming back from this, you know, again, provided he's had enough time to come back that he wouldn't be at like, you know, oh, he's endangering his Achilles. Obviously, could he re-injure his calf? That would seem like a very reasonable thing. But, you know, again, like if Giannis is looking at it, it's like, well, okay, it's, you know, not even May, right? So if I screw up my calf, then I've got 5 months or whatever.
Yeah, even if I miss the first month of the regular season. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sure that's the way Giannis, being the competitor that he is, probably would do the trade-off. Again, like I'm not going to sit here and tell you I have any idea like what the right answer is. I don't know, you know, what the real risk is going to be. But it's just a situation we obviously we hate that we're having this conversation, and we hate that Giannis and the medical staff and the team is going to have to, you know, really make an organizational decision, right, about this. And with Dame, it's similar because he did strain his Achilles. You know, again, we've seen all of these guys, all the big three have had Achilles strains at various points this season, or Achilles tendonitis is what it was called with Giannis. I mean, it happens, but it's tough. And it's not just about, you know, getting them out on the floor in any condition possible, right? Like, I mean, can Dame explode? Can he get to the basket? Like, this isn't like Brooke Lopez, who can be valuable just being enormous and, you know, like moving slowly around the court. Like Dame and Giannis, like they have to be able to move, they have to be able to defend to really be valuable. And again, like, I mean, they're better than Danilo Gallinari minutes. Sorry, Gallo, but it's just it's just going to be really interesting to see kind of how this progresses. It's, let's just say, we'll be closely watching the injury reports and our you know what Shams and Chris Haynes and everybody is, you know, the tea leaves that are being thrown out there.
Yeah. That's what someone suggested to me too, of like, even if he's 80%, can he be a decoy? Like, Giannis is not a decoy. Like, it's not Dame that you can just park in the corner and say, well, you can still shoot. Like, you can't use Giannis as a decoy. So it'll be interesting. But to that other point you made, that's the even more frustrating part, is it's now 3 straight postseasons that injuries have been a massive storyline for the Bucks. And this version of Chris Middleton that you're getting is basically everything you were gambling on and saying, we think if we have these 3 guys, how do you defend that? And based on this version of Chris, yeah, I don't know. They would have been a very real problem if they were healthy, especially as we see all these other injuries start to pile up in the Eastern Conference. Thursday afternoon, 5:30 Central Time tip for the Bucks and the Indiana Pacers. We will see if the season extends from there, and if we are previewing a Game 7 on Saturday. No idea what time that game would tip off, but look, if we get to a Game 7, we are doing a weekend pod in a post game on that.
Why can't we get any extra days off, Justin? Like, I find this very annoying.
That's the other thing is, you know, why do we only get one set of 2 days between games? But
by the way, I'm just looking at some playoff stats, and Pat Bev now in the postseason, 5 games. He's at 9 points, almost 6 assists, and 46.4% field goals, 50% from 3, 87% from the line. Meanwhile, I need to quote this now because we'll never be able to quote these numbers again, probably. Jrue Holiday, our dear friend, 7 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists on 31%, 33%, 100% free throws, splits. So just a reminder, keeping Jrue Holiday was never the answer here. Love Jrue, but it had to happen. So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, look, as we just said with the Khris piece too, it was a trade the Bucks had to make. Once the season's over, I'm sure we'll relitigate that and get into that conversation even larger. Kristaps Porzingis with the same injury now as Giannis, which makes things interesting. I heard a few Celtics media correspondents on WEEI talking about, hey, well, Kristaps is gone. That's why you bring in Jrue. We can run the offense through him. And you immediately thought, I don't know about that. Did you say offense or defense? So that is going to be interesting to keep an eye on. But as we said, what we tackle next is Game 6 in Indy. The Bucks and the Pacers. We'll see if Giannis and/or Damian Lillard is available for that game, and if the Bucks can extend their season once more and force a Game 7. For Frank, I am Justin. We will talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.